Ahoy, hello and welcome to the Meet Maastricht podcast. I'm Katrina and together with our resident local Lucy, we will be exploring some of the amazing stories that make Maastricht so special. So sit back, relax and join us as we learn about our favourite Dutch city. Welcome everybody to episode 7 of the Meet Maastricht podcast. Today is a very special episode because we have our first proper special guest for the upcoming Remembrance and Liberation Days on the 4th and 5th of May. So here today we have Joes Minis. How did I do?
That was so indeed I am Joes Minis. I am curator special collections of Centre Ceramique, the city library, and I also work on the website Zicht op Maastricht. Mm-hmm. And as a curator I have to know a lot about the city and of the city's history. So I guess that's why you've invited me.
Yeah. So are you from Maastricht?
Yes, I was born and raised there.
Oh wow.
As we say in Maastricht, gezogen en getogen.
And what does that mean?
That means suckled and raised.
Oh, okay.
But it rhymes in Maastricht, so that's why.
Yeah, it sounds slightly better in Dutch. So, as I said, we're going to be talking about Remembrance Day and the Liberation of Maastricht, so in World War II. Mm-hmm. And we thought we'd start with what Maastricht was like just before liberation. So, can we talk a little bit about that, Joes?
Yeah, so Maastricht just before liberation, then you're talking about like from August 44. Mm-hmm. So that's when the Americans and the English and of course the Australians, I don't want to forget you, landed on the beach of Normandy on the 6th of June with Operation Overlord, and then very slowly they conquered Normandy, they conquered Brittany. The Germans had their Atlantique wall there, so it was very hard to break through it. But then all of a sudden it goes a lot faster, and by the 5th of September the armies reach the French-Belgian border. And this Tuesday, the Tuesday of 5th September, has gone into the history books as Dolle Dinsdag, or Crazy Tuesday, because every German soldier, every collaborator was afraid that the Americans would reach the Netherlands the next day. Because it all went so fast that they thought they weren't safe. So that's the time when there actually was a sort of anarchy in Maastricht, but in most part of the country actually. So the Germans were fleeing with cars, with wooden carts with horses on it, with bikes. A lot of Dutch can tell you that the Germans stole their bikes in order to get back to Germany, because they were afraid of the Allied forces. Yeah. So this lasted until the 13th of September, when the Americans reached IJsde. So that's the municipality south of Maastricht. I don't know if you've ever been there. Lovely little village. And in IJsde, they found one phone still working. So the Germans were fleeing, but of course they were having this kind of scorched earth method. They blew up all the bridges in Maastricht. I don't know if you've ever seen the pictures of the old bridge, the Silvesius Bridge in Maastricht. That was sprang. Do you say sprang?
Sprang?
Well, at least demolished by the Germans.
Yeah.
With lots of dynamite. And there was an Art Deco bridge in Maastricht. That's where the current Wilhelminabrug is. Okay. So that's the second bridge. That was demolished completely. Wow. Which was a beautiful bridge. And of course the railway bridge was demolished.
Yeah.
But all telephone lines were cut, all electricity was cut. If they could sabotage the railways, they did it. And in this way they hoped to slow down the Allied forces.
Yeah. So
yeah, in IJsde there was one phone. And when the Americans first liberated Liège, and then they went along the Meuse to IJsde, and then in IJsde somebody said, I'm going to call to Maastricht to see what it's like there.
Yeah.
And it turned out that the bridges of Maastricht were only guarded by 150 men. And even though it was rather late in the day, and they actually wanted to head for Aix-la-Chapelle, so Aachen, they turned and liberated Beek on the 13th of September. So that's the same day. And then it was late and it was getting dark. Of course, there was no light. There was a curfew, and people still had all their windows painted black, because you can use paper to prevent light from getting out, but they will always sneak some light out. You paint all the windows black, then no light will go out. So it was too dark for the Americans to lay down a billy bridge, which is a military bridge, and liberate Maastricht. So they did that the next day, and as far as I know, there was only one casualty, which happened in Café Victoria. That is where now the ANWB is, the ANWB store in Wiek. That was a beloved tavern of the German soldiers, German officers, and there was a piano in there, and the Germans had placed a booby trap in the piano.
Oh, no.
And one American soldier who happened to play the piano thought he'd cheer his friends up and wanted to play a tune, but died tragically.
Yeah, that's horrible.
And there's a memorial sign for him on the building.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So that's the liberation of Maastricht.
How long had Maastricht been occupied?
4 years.
4 years, wow.
4 years, 4 months, and 4 days.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, that's a funny coincidence.
Yeah, that's amazing that
So
wasn't
it's really because of one working phone in IJsden that the Americans freed Maastricht, the old Hickory division. So there was really no real fighting.
No, yeah, that's really interesting.
Because everybody was already gone, and there's 50 to 100 soldiers, and there's the American army marching your way. So
yeah, and I suppose it wasn't too far to Germany for them to escape to, really, if that's where they were headed.
No,
from
of
Maastricht,
course.
so not far to run away.
Right. So you'd go to Aachen, and then you're already in Germany.
Yeah.
Or you'd go up north, where I think especially the NSB'ers. So the NSB is the National Socialist Party of the Netherlands, which were, of course, collaborators with the Nazi regime.
Okay. Yeah, so was it very different in Maastricht from other places in the Netherlands, the liberation?
Well, of course, other cities in the Netherlands sometimes had awful fighting. In the middle of Limburg, just north of Sittard. If you want to build a house there, you'll have to call a demolition team of the police before you do so, because there are still grenades in the ground. And but of course, there are also other towns that had a story similar to Maastricht.
Yeah.
So it's in Aachen there was a battle of 9 weeks. And the town of Vaals was just kaput for 9 weeks. So that's very close by, and Maastricht really got lucky.
Yeah. So how did life change in Maastricht after liberation?
So after the liberation, Maastricht became the headquarters for quite some time for the American army in West Europe. And well, the most famous operation that was guided from Maastricht. How do you say that? Well, either way, the most famous, the Maastricht headquarters is, I think, most famous because of the Battle of the Bulge in the Ardennes, which was the last great offensive of the German army. The Ardennes were a very dense forest and not very great for getting your tanks through and your military and your army and everything you're having with you. So the Germans thought, the last thing we can try is to have an offense through this great wood. And they did so, and the Americans had some very serious casualties. And during this time, Maastricht was headquarters of the American army in northwestern Europe. And what's even more strange for me is that Maastricht was a place of rest and recreation after the liberation. So there were, well, if you have an army, then of course all these soldiers sometimes need a little dancing and a little fun and a little drinking and a little company of some girls. And Maastricht was the place for many people in northwestern Europe because the town was, well, really unharmed. There were some bombs that had been dropped by English flyers. How do you say it? Bombers?
Yeah, bombers.
Bombers, yeah, by accident. But really, there was nothing going on in Maastricht. So it was a great city for for the GI Joes to have their relaxing time.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Only on the Vrijthof there were lots of clubs for American soldiers, like the Enlisted Men's Club.
Okay.
And the officers' donut dugout, which was the mummers now. And then a little further on you had the sugar bowl. And then next to the theater, which by then was the police station, they had Officers' Club number 2. Then they had the next to the Wilhelminabrug there is an old bath actually, and that was called Ye Olde Swimming Hall. To which the soldiers had to take their own towel. There was in Wiek there was the Red Cross Enlisted Men's Club with writing, games and dancing, coffee and donuts. So it was really a jolly old time in Maastricht right after the liberation. For the Americans, that is to say, because Maastricht has one of the saddest histories of collaborators and the way we treated our collaborators after liberation.
Yeah. So can you explain what you mean by that? Why was it such a sad history?
So there's always people who collaborate with the Germans, either because they have the same sympathies or the same antipathies, or because they think they are just opportunistic and they think, well, I'll just ben on this horse now. That's not an English expression, is it? No, it is a Dutch one. So there's always these people, and then of course there's always those people who don't like those people. And in Maastricht they were arrested so many. But after the 5th of September there was no more real power in Maastricht. So there was the police, and everybody was a little scared of what was going to happen. Nobody really knew. I think you can compare it with, I think it was the 13th of March, when all of a sudden there was this Corona lockdown. Yeah. And what's this lockdown? And what do you mean lockdown? And can I go to my parents? And or can I go to my neighbor? Or what should it, you know, this strange feeling of I really don't know what's going to happen. That was from the 5th of September to the 13th of September. Yeah. And of course people hoped they would be liberated from the Nazi regime. Yeah. And after the liberation, so just to come back to that, many people started to arrest their former suppressors in the form of these NSBers and other sympathizants of the Nazi regime. And they, in the first paper of Maastricht, which came out on the 15th of September, it stated that it was not allowed to arrest anybody yourself. But of course this continued, and there was no real party that kept any control of the situation. And like I said, there was no supervision, and it was kind of anarchy. So in the end, this meant that you could arrest your neighbor, go to the police and say, this is my neighbor, he's a Nazi, because I once asked him for some sugar and he didn't give it to me, and I knew he thought Heil Hitler. Yeah. And then this guy would be arrested and put in what's now the university library. Okay. That was the military. It was just a military building, and it was used for several things. But in the 40s, it was a prison for political, for Nazis, or for people who wanted, quasi-Nazis. It even went so bad that they started to call it the concentration camp of the Grote Looierstraat. And there were many bad things that happened there, really tortures. And somebody later said, well, there was no blood involved, which means a lot, I think, because you can do a lot without blood.
Yeah.
So yeah, and there were, on the top of it, there were 1,400 people in this building, and there could only fit 700 people in the building.
Oh my goodness.
So they were really packed together in there. Well, as I've heard, awful things happen. But of course, these awful things also happened to other people in the years before.
Yes, of course. And I'm sure that helped drive the want to exact revenge in some way.
That's always what people want, I think.
Yeah. So when did the Americans or the Allied forces leave Maastricht then?
I believe this was during 45, but I don't know exactly. I think that's also a very slow procedure. You know that there's one battalion leaving, and then there's a second battalion leaving. You can see it. The American army still does the same. How long have they been retreating from Afghanistan?
Yeah.
And there were American soldiers in Germany for a long time, Western Germany.
Yeah. So
I don't know really if you ask me, when did the last American leave Maastricht? Maybe this was in the 50s. And of course, Maastricht became a very important NATO base later on in the mountain in the St. Petersberg.
I don't live far from the barracks, so that's really interesting.
Okay. Yeah, so there was this red line, I believe they call it, between Washington, D.C. and Moscow. Yeah, between Washington, D.C. and Moscow. And this line actually crossed, well, through the air, of course, crossed Maastricht. And the famous Televisietoren of Bahnhof played an important role in this, because that was but nobody knew in Maastricht back then.
Yeah.
That was really... you can visit the old center, but the Americans have taken everything out of there. So you can see the walls, and you can see there was a machine here, and there was a machine there, but there's no idea what they actually did in there.
Oh, mystery.
Very interesting mystery, yes.
Was there any other details that you wanted to explore about the liberation? Well,
I think it's very important to be very thankful for the very little damage that World War II has done to Maastricht.
Yeah. If
you compare it to other cities like Aachen, which is so close. So we have been really lucky, and the inhabitants of Maastricht knew this. So in Maastricht there's the Bidweg. I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, that's the praying route of Maastricht, and it starts at the Onze Lieve Vrouwenkerk, and then it goes really a long way through the city. And after the war, people began to thank Mary, the Virgin Mary, because she protected the city. And this is the idea of the Schutzmantel Madonna. So it's the Madonna with the that keeps everything away.
Yeah.
And she protected the city. And there's lots of images of Mary along this Bidweg, which is very, very beautiful to walk. And I think the most interesting one is on the corner of the Kortestraat and the Koestraat. So that's really near the Onze Lieve Vrouwen Square. And there you can see Mary with her cape around 4 citizens of Maastricht. And then in the left corner it says 1940 with a bomb, and in the right corner it says 1944 with a pigeon of peace.
Oh, I'll have to have a look.
Yeah, you should. That's really very interesting history of the liberation, actually, because it's this thanking of the Virgin Mary, and mostly because of the incredible luck they had.
Yeah. Well, we were in our last episode. We were talking about the amount of churches in Maastricht, and one reason why there seems like maybe there is a lot is that in some neighbouring places like Aachen, a lot of things were destroyed, whereas in Maastricht, a lot of things survived. So there are so many beautiful old buildings and churches here that we can still enjoy because they survived the war, whereas places nearby and even in London, and there were so many beautiful things destroyed. Yeah,
most certainly. And of course, the Netherlands never had the First World War, which was far more devastating for buildings than the Second World War.
Yeah.
During the First World War, the Meuse colored red because of all the people that were killed in Liège.
Wow.
And if you walk around in Liège, and I love the city. I think it's Maastricht's older sister, or better, bigger sister. But the First World War really, really, really destroyed the city, and of course the city of Leuven, which had its library destroyed, and then about 3/4 of the city just burned down to the ground.
Mm.
So it's really a combination of not having the First World War and not having the Second World War.
Yeah, it's amazing that
it is.
that it survived. I think, especially, I've said this before on the podcast, but as an Australian, to walk around and see medieval buildings or even buildings from the 17th, 18th century is just amazing to me. As my own experience in Australia is, obviously we have the oldest continuous culture in the world, but we also have quite new built society. So it's amazing to me seeing all these beautiful old buildings that have survived so long.
Yeah, right. I can see that. Yeah, but the Dutch story of the war is not really comparable with the Maastricht story because of the Hongerwinter. I don't know if you know that.
No, I haven't heard.
So in the Americans, the Allied forces actually wanted to cross the great rivers of the Netherlands to the north and then go straight to Berlin, but they failed. They went a bridge too far by Arnhem, if you've ever heard that expression. So they wanted to take the city of Arnhem, which is just above the River Rhine, but they failed to do this, and then they thought, well, then let's change our plans and not liberate the northern half of the Netherlands. And in that northern half of the Netherlands, there was a very severe winter, but there was also no food, or very little food, mostly in cities. So people had to eat, well, that's the story that everybody loves to tell, tulip bulbs and cat. So that's called the hunger winter.
Yeah, and why was that? Was that just lack of trading and things because of the war, or?
Yeah, lack of trading, and of course the Germans had taken everything with them.
Okay,
so they were pulling back out of the Netherlands, and they took everything with them.
Yeah, it must have been a very strange time between, as you said, like a very confusing time between when the Germans were leaving and when they were actually liberated. Right,
but I also don't think that people really care that much, because even when there is a crisis going on, it's always these small personal crises that are somehow way more important. Like, how about this girl I like, or my dog is dying, or something like that. That's always what occupies your mind the most.
Yeah, no, of course.
And then there's this confusing thing going on, but it's above your head, for most people at least.
Yeah. I think you can, as you did before, I think you can relate that to now with people are much more able to, I guess, comprehend and digest issues on a very small scale, whereas like I can't go to the shops or I can't go to work anymore, rather than the whole world is in a state of flux.
Right. So we can't grasp that. So it's much more easier and far more important to get food.
Yeah.
And that's also one of the reasons of the hunger winter. Everything was on how do you say that, on the bon. So you had to get a ticket.
Okay, yeah.
For bread, like a receipt, like a voucher.
Yeah.
To get bread, to get butter, to get new shoes, to get everything. Everything was limited.
Yeah.
So the first thing that the new forces had to do, which were newly installed Dutch people, was trying to get this up and running again. Just trying to print vouchers, and they had to print in the newspaper what butter you could get and how much it took you to get a new pair of shoes. And until deep in the 50s, you could only get shoes with this voucher.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So that's really the long-term consequences of the war.
Yeah. I know, just on the shoes, my grandfather's brother, so they were in Scotland, but they had rationing and the ticket system. And I know that his brother had tiny feet. He had very small feet, and he had to get shoes specially made. And so he and my grandfather remembers in a similar time in Scotland that they saved them up and they used them to buy special shoes for David because he needed them. So I think that sort of resonates with me in my mind. Just yeah,
indeed. And it's all these kind of the very small histories that make up this late 40s.
Yeah.
And well, the 40s as a whole in Europe.
Yeah.
There was a time of scarcity, but this started in 29, of course, with the crash on Wall Street. And I remember my grandfather is 94, and I talk to him a lot. And he always says, we already had a bad life before the war started.
Yeah.
There was no money, there was no food, there was no work. So when the war started, it was just, well, we can have that too.
Yeah. It's like, of course, it's just...
Of course,
life,
war
life
starting,
just gets worse, so of course it does.
Worse and worse and worse, yeah.
Yeah.
And then it started getting better in the 50s, the welfare state.
Yeah. So does your grandfather sort of recognize that there was an improvement after the war then? They were on the up.
Yeah. But he doesn't lay this improvement in the war nor in the liberation. He really focuses on the welfare state.
Yeah.
Because he also had to go to Indonesia to fight against the Indonesians.
Right.
So Indonesia was a colony of the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And well, they liberated themselves from the Japanese, and then they declared independence. And then the Dutch did not want their independence and sent some soldiers. And my grandfather was one of them.
Wow.
So he was in Indonesia for 4 years right after the war.
Yeah. So the liberation wasn't necessarily a liberation for very long or for everyone.
No. But I think that you can say that the liberation did make us more aware of its value and of the dangers of fascism.
Thank you so much for listening to part 1 of our Remembrance and Liberation Day special with youth. Part 2 will be coming out very shortly, so make sure to keep your ears peeled for that and have a lovely Remembrance Day. Thank you so much for joining us today, and don't forget to follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook by searching Meet Maastricht and on Instagram at @meet_Maastricht. If you would like to learn more about us, you can also visit our website at meetmaastricht.eu, where you can buy tickets and subscribe to our monthly newsletter so you're always up to date. Thanks again, and tune in next time to learn more about our beautiful city.
Tot ziens.